Gill, and I'm here at ACEN 2013 with Helen McCarthy.
Hello.
How did you first get into the world of anime and writing?
Oh my. We have to wind back quite a long way. In 1981, I met a guy who had just come back from a holiday in Europe. And in Europe, they have a great deal of anime material. He'd bought a pile of Mazinger Z stuff in Spanish. He was just so excited. He was an illustrator. He found it thrilling. And when we started going out together, he showed me this stuff. And I found it thrilling because even though I didn't speak a word of Spanish, I could follow the narrative from the pictures. So I thought, I want to know more about this. I want to find out more about it. And the more we looked, the more we discovered that there wasn't anything available in English. At that time, 81, there were a few fanzines, but you had to know about them. You had to be a member of the CFO, which was in America, of course, or you had to be aware that these things were happening. Very, very restricted, small circulation, print zines, maybe 50, 100 copies. There was a little bit in books, in histories of animation, but it was usually just one or two lines. Basically dismissive of Japanese animation, saying it was kids' stuff, it was big-eyed, Saturday morning, cheap cartoon fodder. And I knew from the little I'd seen that it wasn't that way. So we had a few friends who were into Star Trek, because I've been a Trekkie since way back when, and many of them, being American, were also into anime because they had connections on bases or with CFO members. So that way we got more information, and I realized that in America there wasn't a book in English on anime either. So I thought, okay, if nobody else will write one, I better write one. So I started doing the research and I started pitching to publishers, which was a first for me because I'd never considered anything like that before. And I finally got to publish my book in 1993, 12 years later. But in order to get there, I had to actually set up a magazine to create a market for it. So it was an interesting journey. But I suppose the thing that thrilled me about anime was that narrative drive. That was the first thing. That ability to tell a story with very simple means, graphically through pictures that would communicate with anyone. And then having grasped that, I fell in love with the characters. And then of course there was the design. So really the minute I saw it, it was just inevitable that I would love anime.
Not just the design, but the social responsibility that's conveyed in anime that I watched back when Tezuka and Ishinomori were producing anime and going on to directors like Tomino. There's a sense of social responsibility in a number of those titles, at least I feel.
Well, to a certain extent, I think you're right. One of the things you mentioned, one of my favourites there, Tomino, Gundam, was I'm a Gundam fangirl. And the thing that I loved most about Gundam is that everything in that universe is man's fault. There's no blaming our problems on aliens or gods or evil influences. Everything that happens because we choose it. And I think that's bleak, but I think it's a really realistic way of approaching it. And I just love Tomino's ability to make characters. That's fantastic.
All right. You were also asked to teach at university. Can you tell us about that opportunity?
Well, yeah, I've actually done teaching at several universities, but my most recent gig, for example, was working on a project with art students, because one of the interesting things about anime is the way it connects with the arts on so many different levels, the literary arts, music, writing. And there's one of our local universities in Norwich in England that runs the only course in the country that teaches the fine arts side of gaming. It teaches people to be game designers on a serious theoretical academic level as well as on an artistic level. So it equips them to think about game design and to know why they're designing the games and what they're doing for the games. Some very talented people working on the course and some very talented students. And they asked me to come along because so much of anime ties into game design, because I've worked with them before on a manga project in a similar thing, and we had the best time. We spent 3 days working on this project to help the students to integrate a number of different artistic ideas, using techniques from anime and manga, using ideas that I've gained from, as you say, the social responsibility and the philosophy of anime and manga. That was just an absolute blast. But I think my favourite university gig is still being invited to lecture at Akita International University in Japan. Because for somebody with 4 words of functional Japanese, 2 of which are please and thank you, that's quite a tribute. But Akita International is a very progressive university, and what they asked me to do was to come and give a series of talks, one on the history of anime, one on a topic of my choice, which was a very odd topic, but we can talk about that some more if you like, and one on how the philosophy of anime and manga were expressed in the work of Osamu Tezuka. So that was just wonderful. I did that in 2008. And that was a thrill and a privilege. It was absolutely amazing to be there. Because again, in Japan, the study of anime and manga is still very largely in its infancy. Serious studies in anime and manga didn't start till the 70s, didn't really get off the ground and get funding until the 90s. So it's a new field of scholarship for the Japanese as well as for us, which is very exciting.
Absolutely. And there is also the concern of preserving a lot of these works, too, for further study. I talked to Noboru Ishiguro a few years back before he passed on, and he said that there's no archival system like we have the National Archives for registering film. There's nothing like that for animation in Japan, and that's a real shame.
Yeah. And it's not only the finished product, the film itself, but it's all the stages of producing that product. If you think about Disney, for example, or Warner, they've got huge archives with storyboards, with key drawings, with finished cells, with all the publicity work, all the posters. I don't think very many studios have that for anime. I mean, anime isn't just the finished series or the finished film. It's all the art that went into making it. And we know how many cells have been sold. And most old school fans have heard the legends about the cells dug into the back lots of studios because nobody could be bothered to dispose of them and they were too expensive to burn. So cells are going. And if there isn't a proper archival collection soon, it will be too late to make one.
And hopefully we'll see, some more fans, maybe donate some of their collections to these archival processes if they come about. That would be wonderful.
Well, it would be wonderful because there are quite a lot of cell collectors in Japan, of animation memorabilia collectors in Japan. But again, the problem with that sort of collection is that without a national museum to focus on or a national archive to focus on, collectors don't know where to leave their property. Very often when people have spent a lifetime collecting, especially as they get older and they want to simplify their lives, they'd be very happy to leave it to a really great archive where the public could have access and could enjoy it. But if that archive doesn't exist, what do you do? It's very difficult.
No centralization, that's a shame. Now, you've also endorsed and contributed an academic publication on anime. Can you tell us about that?
Oh, I've contributed to several academic publications, but the most recent one was an English language publication by English and Japanese and American and European scholars. I actually did some work on advising on the initial drafts. I was one of their beta readers. Because very often when you've got people who are working in a language that isn't their first language, it can be quite helpful to have beta readers who are not just experts in the subject but also editors so that they can advise. And I was asked to read there and I was very happy to do that. That's a publication at the University of Minnesota. But I was thrilled when they asked me if I would endorse it because so much of it is testimony and record and discussion from people who've been active in the industry since the 60s and 70s. So it's so good to see a publication with that breadth that they have both contemporary scholars and people who actually work in the industry and also people who come in from other arts and who bring another perspective. It's a very good book indeed.
Wonderful. Now, you've also helped to put together a costume exhibition. Can you discuss with us that process?
Yeah, surely. I mean, I've done several costume exhibitions over the years, and at the moment I'm in the process of helping a friend of mine to make one for the World Science Fiction Convention, which is in London next year in August 2014. We're hoping to present a display of both live costumes and pictures of costumes that have been really influential in British cosplay and how British cosplay has developed, because that's obviously an area that really interests us as Brits, but also that's not much documented. But the skills that we're using to do that, both my friend Mickey and I have acquired over years of doing costume displays at British conventions and doing costume conventions. And I was really delighted, again 2 years ago in 2010, to be asked by the Barbican to help with their exhibition called Infinite Beauty, 50 Years of Fashion from Japan. And what they did was they took a collection of fashions from Japan, contemporary fashion from Japan, which had been built up since the 60s by a single collector. And they presented this wonderful collection in a gorgeous gallery, beautifully set. And they did a book which not only discussed each fashion item itself, but also presented the context through a series of essays. And I was able to contribute an essay about how anime and manga were influential in Japanese arts and the links there. And that was just thrilling, because there were so many great scholars and commentators in that book talking about fashion, talking about textiles, talking about politics, talking about social movements. And to be part of a group like that is really great, because you're learning as much as you're contributing along the way. So one of my favorite things is to talk about costume, to display costume to people, to tell them about how great costume is, and then get from them what they get. So all this time I've been able to do this has been just wonderful.
Wonderful to hear. Let's see here. It says here you've revised and updated an earlier book that you've written in a very short time period, only 3 months. What process is that like, to be able to go through your work and to revise it so quickly and efficiently?
Well, that's kind of slightly a collision, in that I was working on 2 books at the same time. One of them had to be written in 3 months, and the other had to be revised and updated in 9. So not quite so bad, but still quite a tight thing, because it's a big book. There are 2 things about updating any book, and they apply equally to writing new. One is that you have to be quite intensive about how you approach it. You have to give yourself strict time scales, and as far as possible keep to them. I'm very bad at that, but I do my best to keep up as far as possible. And the other thing is that you have to have a high boredom threshold, because one of the reasons that Jonathan Clements and I wrote the Anime Encyclopedia a while back is we said, we watch the rubbish so you don't have to. 90% of any entertainment medium is not that great. It's entertaining, it's acceptable, it's not that great. 90% of anime conforms to Sturgeon's revelation in that it is crud. And in order to update the book, you have to intensively watch an awful lot of anime, which means that 90% of your time is going to be spent on things that are less than high art. It's been that really is difficult. It's difficult to maintain your enthusiasm, it's difficult not to be bored, and the challenge for a writer is that it's difficult not to be cynical when you meet the same plot for the 30th time that month, or the same character set for the 30th time that month, or the same variation on a harem for the 30th time that month. To keep your attitude fresh and open to the possibility that this may be a great show, not to close down immediately you see that it is yet another younger sister loves older brother show. So that was a challenge, but writing in 3 months, that was an enormous challenge, and I wouldn't have done it had not the editor who asked me to do it been one of my favorite editors of all time. It's a very short book, and frustratingly, it's going to be an even shorter book because we've now been asked to cut it by a third. But essentially, I had to write the history of manga in 3 months, and in 45,000 words, which will now go down to 30,000 words. And it's actually much tougher to write short than to write long. But it's a real challenge to think about a subject and think, what do average fans, average people, intelligent readers but not specialists, who are approaching manga for the first time, what do they really need to know about this medium to understand why they might enjoy it? And that was the challenge, and that was fun. That was a really good time.
All right. How have conventions changed over the many years that you have been going to them? Not just in quantity of people that have been attending.
Oh gosh, that is the core of conventions is still the same. Is that it's still people who love something getting together to have a good time, talking about the thing they love and celebrating the thing they love. But in terms of, I think for me there are 2 things. First, in terms of the attendees, because travel has got relatively cheaper and practically much simpler, and because people now have more disposable income, even though they feel poorer because we're in recession, now people have much more money to spend than they had in 1974 when I went to my first ever convention. you get a lot more people coming to conventions and a lot more people spending more time at conventions and a lot more people going to more conventions. And the effect that has on the community is lovely because it means that people can go to several conventions in a year rather than just one. They meet the same friends at various conventions, so a community builds that isn't just centered on one convention or one fandom, but that spreads across a lot of fandoms. And even though most of us can't go to as many conventions as we'd like to, because we can't afford it and we don't have time, the fact that we can go to a number of conventions and meet some of the same people there and some different people there, there are friends you always see at A-Kon, there are friends you see at Expo, there are friends you see at Katsucon, there are friends you see at Minami-Con in England. You build up a community and you kind of know, yeah, I'm going to see so-and-so when I go there. That'll be really cool. So it makes the con even more pleasurable because as well as getting to see more of the stuff you love and going to more conventions for things you love, your community has extended. That's the big change for the attendees side, and that is wonderful. I'm not so sure whether the second thing that most people think of, the development of multiple programs, is wonderful because everybody knows the frustration of getting to a con and opening the program book and seeing that 5 cool things you want to see are on at the same time. That is so, in some ways, life was simpler when we had cons with 1 or 2 program streams and it was take it or leave it. Now, even though you're going to so much cool stuff, you're constantly missing even more cool stuff. So that can be frustrating. But, you know, there is no doubt that the growth of conventions has been great for the community. But as a con runner, because I ran many cons for many years, I find the biggest change is in the simplicity that technology brings to some of the really difficult tasks. Con running is still a lot of work, a lot of number crunching, a lot of organization, a lot of grind. It's tough, and I have the greatest respect for people who still run cons, and I thank them all sincerely because they do such great work for all of us, con staff, con organizers, fantastic people. But there's no doubt that now, because they have computers, because we have smartphones, because we have iPads, because we have technology that helps us to record things more easily, we have spreadsheets, we have databases, it's just simpler to do the admin and the number crunching of a con than it's ever been. And that means that people can expand because they can focus on other areas. They can focus more on the program. They can devote more time to things that are productive of a good experience for con runners, for con goers, rather than just having to be doing all the admin. That still has to be done, of course, but because it's easier, they can do more work. So I think that now, because there is all this wonderful technology, it's easier for con runners to provide a better experience. And that means more people try con running. More people enjoy con running, they don't get so ground down by it, which means more cons, and that's got to be good.
Absolutely. Is there anything you wish to say to your fans that have enjoyed your publications?
Oh, please buy them all. Please buy them for everyone you know, buy a copy for everybody on your Christmas list. I really appreciate the fact that people are going out and buying books in this day and age when most people either pirate them or don't bother. They say I can find it all on Wikipedia. So I am very grateful that people like to buy my books, but also I'd really like to say buy more books. Just buy more books in general. And if you can't afford to buy books, go to your library. And definitely go to your library anyway, because libraries should be supported. Because I think that what we need to keep the anime and manga industry flourishing in the West is we need informed, articulate, intelligent fans who don't only know what they like, but know why they like it and why they want it. Because if fans are informed and articulate and demanding, companies become better at giving them what they want. Conventions become better at giving them what they want. So if fans educate themselves about anime and manga, then they're better placed to help the industry keep going. So don't just buy my books. Buy other people's books. Buy as much as you can on anime and manga, or borrow it and read it. Educate yourself as much as you can about these wonderful industries, and never stop learning. Never stop learning about the things that you love. I think this the single biggest thing we can all take away from life is that man is a learning organism. We learn every day, and if we don't learn every day, we are actually on the road to our own dissolution. So why not learn about the things you love? That's the best thing you can do, and definitely do it by buying my books.
Do you have any final messages aside what you've already stated, and where can fans go to find your publications?
Well, I am, of course, on Amazon, like everybody and the dog nowadays. And I have a couple of poetry books on Smashwords, and I'm hoping to bring those out soon because I write haiku, Japanese short form poetry, and other poetry, but I've begun to publish my haiku. But Amazon is a good source, but I also have a blog, A Face Made for Radio, which is not updated as often as I would have liked in the past 6 months because I've been so busy. But I welcome people there. There's a space to comment there. You can email me there. I'm on Twitter. I'm a fanatic tweeter. I tweet poetry every day. And I tweet anime and manga news and other stuff that interests me as it comes up. And you can follow me on @tweetheart4711. And all that information is right there on my blog. So please visit, say hello, because I love people talking to me. And it's funny, I quite often on Twitter get embroiled in minor spats and flame wars and things like that. And somebody said to me a while back in another interview after I'd had a particular flame session, does that upset you? Don't you mind? And it doesn't upset me at all. I love it. I love intellectual combat. I don't like people slinging insults and tedium, but that's just part of life. We all meet stupid people. But what I really like is discussing something fiercely and intelligently with people that love it and care about it, because very often they know things I don't, so I can learn from them. And if they don't know things I don't, at least we both get a chance to test out our theories in talking to each other. So just talk to me, because I love talking to people. It's the best way of sharing fandom, anything you love. And it's a really good way for me to know what other people are thinking about anime and manga, and to find out what's going on in fandom now, which is really important.
All right. Helen McCarthy, thank you so much for speaking with us.
That's a pleasure. Thank you for giving me time to talk. I love to do it, as you can see.